Welcome to The Way the World Works, where the trusted team behind the Tuttle Twins books tackles current events, hot topics, and fun ideas to help your family find clarity in a world full of confusion.
Hi, Katie.
Hey, Brittany.
So today I want to talk about a really fun story that I found that just really, it was just such a feel-good thing and such an important thing about why property rights are so important that I thought it would make a good story to share on here. And it's about a town called Eatonville in Florida and why this tiny town in Florida is so important. So what is Eatonville? Well, let's do a little background on that first. So, there is this era after the Civil War that we call the Reconstruction era. And think of that as like they were trying to reconstruct the very broken South after war torn and just destroyed because a lot of their like infrastructure was burned down. So, here they are trying to rebuild, and the government made it a lot worse, right? Because they came in and tried to enforce all these laws now. And again, 14th Amendment was great. It declared what we already know, that every person, no matter their skin color, no matter what, has the inherent right to be free. That doesn't matter if you live in America or not. You might not have a country that recognizes that right, but every single one of us is born equal and is born free with the right to life, liberty, and property. But that wasn't always the case. So the Civil War ends, but then there's a lot of chaos because the Southern people, to change the world, you have to change hearts and minds. And the problem is the hearts and minds in the South weren't changed yet. And then the federal government came in and said, all right, now you have to, get along with everybody. And what happened there is the South found ways to get around these equal protection laws to create terrible laws called Jim Crow. And Jim Crow laws are this idea that everybody could be equal, kind of, but you could be separate and equal. So what does that mean? That means that in the South, there were two bathrooms in public places. There was a white bathroom and a black bathroom. There were different drinking fountains, one for black people, one for white people. There were different areas on the train. There was the white section and the black section. And unfortunately, it's awful. The black sections of these, the bathrooms or the trains or the back of buses, you guys know probably the Rosa Parks story. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But these were often they weren't taken care of. They were the bad like parts of the train, though, and they didn't clean them as well. And it was horrible, right? Because again, like everybody's a human, we deserve that dignity. And it was a terrible, terrible dark time in the South. But even the federal government's laws couldn't make it better. The South and their local governments still found ways to put in these horrible Jim Crow laws. And so it was really hard, even post-Civil War, for newly freed Black people to provide and create a better future for their family. So then you have the Reconstruction era ends. I think it actually went for I think it was 15 to 20 years after the Civil War. And the South is still a complete mess. Racism is a huge problem because the Jim Crow laws are allowing legalized racism, really. And so even though Black people could own property, the problem is finding someone to sell them that property, right? So it was like they couldn't even have this opportunity to be self-sufficient and to start their own lives until there was a group of younger Black guys that I was going to call them younger Black dudes. And I was like, I don't think they used the word dude back then. I'm such a Californian at heart. I grew up there and I still say dude every sentence. But so they were like, they identified the problem. They were like, okay, our Black communities are struggling because they can't even start communities. We're here in these neighborhoods where they don't want us here. We're not able to buy property, but buying property is the way to really live free. So what do we do? And so there was a couple of them, and oh my goodness, I just forgot his name, but I'll glance over here. Was it Joseph E. Clark? I think it was Joseph E. Clark. So he decided to meet up with some other guys, and they were going to try to buy land. He was a Black gentleman for their own community. Now, he was 6 years old when the war ended. So he was able to attend school. His father, who had been freed from slavery, saved $400 in the early years of freedom, which was a lot of money back then. So he was able to pay for his son's education. And so this guy, Joseph Clark, had tried over and over again to get people to sell him the land because he had this dream. He wanted to build a self-sufficient Black town where people had this freedom to learn to live free, to be self-sufficient. And finally, he found somebody a guy named Josiah Eaton. He had all this land. And then this guy, Josiah Eaton, was friends with this other guy named Lewis Lawrence. And Lawrence was what they call a philanthropist. And a philanthropist is kind of a professional do-gooder, if you will. Like, it's somebody who's usually pretty rich and has a lot of like passion causes he or she is passionate about, and so they want to give their money. And for Lawrence, Lewis Lawrence, he was a big like abolitionist, and he wanted to help these Black people get their own town. He really liked their cause, so he got Josiah Eaton to agree to sell the land to these Black people. And then Lawrence actually bought some land also, so he was also giving it to them. So eventually this guy Joseph Clark had 112 acres of land that he could build this town on, and that's what he did. He built this amazing town called Eatonville, Florida, where this Black community started to thrive. And Katie, the reason they started to thrive is because of private property rights. So if they went into a white town and they wanted to buy something, a storekeeper could very much say, "Get out of my store, I don't want to sell it to you." And now they have the opportunity to say, "Okay, fine, I don't want to buy from you. I'm going to buy from someone in my own town." And in Eatonville, all these businesses were popping up. They built a church. They built a school that was known for being like one of the best Black schools in America for a very long time. So they had all these self-sufficient, self-governing opportunities in this town that nobody else, no other Black communities had in the United States, which is pretty powerful, I think. And Katie, you said you'd never heard this story before, right?
I had not. And then as you've been talking and we've been prepping, I have encountered it because in the Tuttle Twins Guide to Courageous Heroes, we feature a chapter on Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington lived at the same time that all of this was happening. And he is so interesting to me
He's
because,
great.
yeah, and we're able to contrast him. So around the same time, we had two different ways of thinking, and we can almost call them like a free market way of thinking and a government-led way of thinking. So we have Booker T. Washington, who was, the child of slaves, and we have W.E.B. Du Bois, who was raised in the North, and his congregation at his church sent him off to Europe to go to, receive a really great education. And so at the same time, we essentially had these two kind of warring schools of thought about what life should look like for Black Americans post-slavery. And so Du Bois said, well, he had traveled, he had become a socialist traveling around Europe. And he was like, well, we need, the government needs to make it right. We need special considerations for Black people. We need, essentially to be given lots of things to make this equal. And then we had Booker T. Washington, who essentially said, look, we just want to compete. We just want to be able to do business and compete in business with white people, and we will produce better products and we will run better businesses. And so we will be self-sufficient in that way. And Du Bois, went on to found the NAACP, and that has always been, a very government affiliated program and way of kind of viewing the world. But I love Booker T. Washington's approach. He loved Eatonville. He wrote about Eatonville as an example. And he wrote a book called The Negro in Business. And he talked about Eatonville and that it was a model of what the African American entrepreneurial spirit could create and what it could look like.
He was so great, and I'm glad you brought him up because he's just one of my heroes. But the town, I think a real testament to how powerful this town is one of the people that came out of it, and she's one of my heroes. Her name is Zora Neale Hurston, and Zora Neale Hurston was part of what they called the Harlem Renaissance. That was when like a lot of Black art and jazz started coming out, and it was just like this real big celebration. But she was born in Eatonville, and she was a libertarian for like, I don't know if the word is around back then, but I think like that is what she was. And she wrote so much about why growing up in Eatonville is the reason she really didn't see race how other people did. She's like, I never grew up thinking I was going to be held back because I was Black, because that just wasn't in my nature. I saw entrepreneurship
Mm-hmm.
rise people out of poverty and overcome, racism. It was such a foreign idea for me. And so I think, what Booker T. Washington says is really true, because we saw it happen. We saw Zora Neale Hurston come out of there
Mm-hmm.
and become an incredible author. She's a great author, and such a powerful figure. And also she was standing up to like, how do I always say his name wrong? It's Dubois,
I
right?
think it's Dubois, but I'm not.
Dubois.
Yeah.
So she would stand up to some of the stuff he said too, and she got a
Yeah.
lot of criticism. In fact, a lot of people wouldn't print her work in her later days, and then it was rediscovered. She kind of had this like libertarian rebirth where people rediscovered her amazing quotes and everything she had to say. But it
And
all
she,
began. Go on.
well, and she lived it. She wasn't just theorizing. She
Yes,
was
she lived it.
she was living it.
And I think that's what Eatonville was. It was living it.
Mm-hmm.
Eatonville wasn't a theory of a place like, oh, what if we had a place like this? Eatonville was the real deal. Eatonville was this place where, because of property rights, they were able to live free. And I think that's such an important lesson, because property rights are actually the foundation of all other rights. And
Mm-hmm.
we forget that sometimes. Because of property rights, you have the right to say whatever you want, right? Free speech or not free speech on someone's private property, right? You get those free speech rights. You get the right to protect against unwarranted searches, on your private property. So property is really this super right, if you will, that
Right.
connects to all the other rights. And so this story is just so perfect to me and exemplifies how important it is and how it helps people truly live free. So I wanted to share that with you guys. It's one of my absolute favorite stories. There's no real, I wish there was like a book about it. There isn't. There's just little articles here and there, but I would love to hear all the different stories. I wish Zora Neale Hurston had lived long enough to like interview everyone in that town and get stories, because the stories she does have are just so amazing.
It
So we
sounds like
will,
you have a book to write.
it sounds like I have a book to write. That's, you know what, Katie? I like that. I'm going to have to do that. Well, everybody, we'll leave it there. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, we will talk to you later.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Way the World Works. Make sure your family is subscribed and check out TuttleTwins.com for more awesome content.